Welcome to our third Salesforce Republic event in partnership with OwnBackup. For those of you, Kris, I know you recognized a few people on the call, but just in case you're new to Salesforce Republic, we are the largest private community of Salesforce professionals within the ecosystem. And as part of the community, we provide career advice and insights, thought leadership, and hidden opportunities to support your career in Salesforce. So this afternoon, we're joined by Kris, Technical Account Manager at OwnBackup, who'll be offering advice and top tips on how best to protect your Salesforce data. Without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Kris.
Thanks very much, Caitlin, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are in the world. I know there's quite a few people across the globe. So as Caitlin kind of mentioned, I'm Kris McCabe. I'm one of the Technical Account Managers here at OwnBackup. And I'd also like to welcome you to OwnBackup London. So we have quite a few different offices, but this one is probably one of the most historic, if you will, because you've got lots of great buildings here. But anyway, enough about the local architecture. So let's just talk a little bit about kind of like where I kind of sit in all this. So I work with a lot of our more complex enterprise level customers to dealing with sort of really weird and wonderful architectures that are out there. Having experienced how to recover data from various loss incidents and corruptions, I kind of get deployed out to our customers and actually help them out whilst they're having these what we call data loss incidents. And with that, I'm also a certified Salesforce professional up to an architect level. So obviously you can ask me all the technical questions later. If it's more difficult, the merrier. I'm happy. So we're not going to go too far, hopefully, into the technical details of this talk. But of course, if there's anything you want to ask, let's discuss that at the end of the session, and we'll try and answer all your questions. So a little bit about OwnBackup. So if you're not familiar with OwnBackup, we are one of the world-leading backup and recovery platforms. But as well as that, we kind of look towards helping our customers protect their data as well. So in terms of doing anonymization of data, so any personal identifiable information, which should be used for enhanced sandbox seeding, or actually relocating any legacy data that may sit on Salesforce into a platform which is securing that data and can be brought back in, if needed, to Salesforce to sort of help bring storage costs down as well. And I think the biggest thing that I want to just sort of let you know about OwnBackup is we've been going for probably 6 or 7 years now as a company, and already we have 400 plus 5-star reviews. So our customers shout from the rooftops about what we do. We're also very much invested within Salesforce Ventures and a number of other partners who have made us into, I think it was $31 billion unicorn this year as value. So we're growing, and we're growing rapidly. And we also work with over 4,000 plus customers across the industry, trying to avert their disasters and helping them never fall down in the cloud, as we like to call it. Okay, so some of the badges here is some of the customers we work with, and they've been absolutely amazing to help us drive us forward as well, and also helping them secure their data. So one of the things I want to touch on before we go into the weeds a little bit is something in regards to one of our recent surveys, which is with Forrester Consulting, who did a survey for us in May 2021 on our behalf. And it's to talk a little bit about kind of the concept of how people think that their data is secured when it comes to SaaS CRM applications. And what is interesting is that a lot of people we speak to believe that 60% they believe it's sort of their organization's responsibility to look after their data, make sure that it can be backed up and can be recovered under what is known as the shared responsibility model between the customer and Salesforce. But what is also interesting with that is 40% still in the market today that have a SaaS application believe it's the vendor's responsibility, or actually doesn't know the answer. And that's quite shocking when you think about it. I mean, I know that obviously Salesforce does a backup and restore capability, and for a time they stopped that. But it was interesting that when we talked to our customers, they were like, "Oh, well, Salesforce will sort it for us, and they'll be able to restore it." No, is the answer. Well, up until more recently, where they had their own solution. But we've been in the market for a long, long time, and we know some of the challenges. We've seen some of the scars that businesses face, and it's incredible and amazing that a number of our customers still even do the weekly backup. If you know the weekly export job that you can run from Salesforce, and then they just pull it down, put it into some sort of repository, and you forget about it. But the thing with that is that of course you've got a week's worth of data, but say like you're halfway through your week, you've lost a whole load of data already, because you won't be able to sew that back together from a recovery standpoint. So this was quite an interesting stat. But if we kind of look at this in a little bit more detail, so actually one of the questions you said, is to what extent do you agree that data stored in the cloud is automatically backed up regarding your SaaS application? And 81% kind of said yes to that statement. So that was interesting. But with the 19% that said no, that was out of 277 business and IT decision makers we asked out of this. And this is again kind of reinforcing the fact that that false sense of belief that everything's secure when it's in a SaaS application. It really isn't. It is actually your responsibility as a business to make sure your data is up to date, making sure you can recover. So with that being said, what are the top 3 leading causes? Well, there's a lot of derivatives around this, so I'm going to just focus on 3 big areas because that's kind of where it falls under. But the top one is cyber attacks, believe it or not, for SaaS applications. And a lot of people will think, well, hang on, if it's a SaaS application, they're usually quite secure. Salesforce is very secure. It's very much, in the realm of keeping your data safe, but occasionally, and very occasionally, there can be interceptions. Think along the lines of like cross-scripting, SOCL injection, all that kind of stuff there, where basically you can grab the data out through just touching the API, and actually starting to get the data, stealing the data out of the system. The other one as well is human error. So actually that's quite a common, I find it's kind of common, but interestingly it's second top. So this is where somebody accidentally deleted data, or perhaps gone in and changed lots and lots of records. I see a couple of smiles already, going, yes, I've experienced this pain. And this is so easy to do, especially, with some of the orgs that you probably have handled. There's quite a lot of clunky process perhaps, or maybe lots of fields to implement and to keep updated, and that can cause corruption and potential loss. And then rogue add-on applications, we're awesome as users because we like to try and find ways to do things faster, help ourselves be productive. But if you don't actually keep in mind that actually you've got these applications that can be added and you're not happy with, you've not done the homework to see they're secure or whether they could be causing you any issues, you can get lost that way, because you might just add in something that you don't know what it does, and all of a sudden you've just killed a lot of data, or by accident, and it's a very, very hard conversation once you've done that. So I found that quite interesting. But if we move into the next slide, so data loss is inevitable. Okay. I always say to our customers, it's not the case of if you're going to get a data loss or corruption, it's the case of when. And I'm sure all of you have some scars somewhere when this might have happened, and you go, oh great, this is going to really wake me up on a Monday morning, and you spend hours trying to remediate, right? And interestingly enough, when a data loss incident happens on SaaS applications, it's quite it brings a business to its knees. But when was the last time, we asked the question of when was the last time your organization encountered a data loss and a corruption incident, and that was within your SaaS CRM application. Interestingly, over 75% of the people you surveyed they respond to this question, but actually 30% said it was within the last 3 months. That's scary, because we always kind of assume it never really happens, or if it happens, 6 months, maybe 12 months, more than a year, but actually it happens more regularly than you think. The thing is, not many people talk about it for obvious reasons, because obviously it can cause a lot of industry impact on the business name, but also, it tends to be something that our technical COE teams tend to just handle. And it could be as minor as just 1 or 2 records, or it could be several million, right? So that's quite an interesting stat when we look at kind of loss. So I guess now that I've said that, how do I translate to how we defend that? Now, one of the things I always like to say is prevention is your best cure. Okay, so being proactive and being able to set the right level of permissions and profiles in your Salesforce org is really important. One of the ones that I always get told about is also giving permissions which are more than what people need. For example, that lovely permission called modify all data. Now, that is a very powerful permission. And when people don't understand how their permissions and profiles are structured, you'll find that that will probably be put into a lot of permission sets. Funny enough, there's a principle in information security called permission of least privilege, right? So we should always operate under that guide of giving enough permission to allow you to do your job, to access the features within the application, and not to give too much in terms of access. We also look at things like field level security. So should you be actually able to view fields? Should you be able to edit them? Should they even be hidden, right? So, and I kind of find this interesting as well, because a lot of people will put in, all sorts of field level security, and mostly to the highest level of edit. And if there's some fields you just really don't want to change or want people to change the values of, think about setting the right level of field level security, because that will help you defend against corruption, more importantly. Avoiding multiple integrations with users that, or even users with a single user. Now, this is quite a common one I have seen, where people might use, like, say one's a user account and it has their integration for DocuSign on it. It has their integration for OwnBackup on it. It has their integration for X, Y, or Z, whatever application you have. With that can also cause loss potentially, or even misalignment. So in itself will give you corruption. Think about concurrent sessions and record locking. That is one of the things that can cause some damage to the Salesforce and to any other application, because it can impact the data that you might be storing. So my advice is always to separate those integrations out. And also, if you have got users that are using a single user account, it's probably, well, first of all, it's a very bad idea, and I'm pretty sure you know that. But a lot of companies will tend to do that if they've got license hopping issues, or they're trying to keep license costs down. Really, we shouldn't do that, partly because it's in the Salesforce contract that you shouldn't, but also from a security standpoint, it's also gives you lack of auditing. So if somebody does make a change, you don't know who did it. And that's really quite detrimental when you're trying to work back over damage, or what happened, or what did people do. And that's not going to be a really comfortable conversation with your CIO or your information security officer. One that often gets missed is the user interface design. So what am I talking about here? We've all seen it, I'm sure. An org with like hundreds and hundreds of fields in one page, and you're expecting everyone to fill all these hundreds of fields. And that, to me, can also cause corruption. It can cause confusion, because the user may not be able to navigate through that record. They may not be able to update it successfully, or perhaps there are too many fields that you've had over the years that are just redundant, or maybe being partially filled in, and that's going to cause you some problems. Because think again, some of that data may go into other integrations, and that's going to cause you, more of an issue on the wider front. The other one I'm going to say here, and this is going to be a little bit controversial, is about being too restrictive. And you're thinking, hang on, Kris, you just said you don't want as many fields on the page, but now you're telling me you don't want to be too restrictive either. You've got to find the right balance. And then what I mean by that is often the kind of way that we go about trying to handle the data being processed and making sure it's validated is we put in a lot of validation rules, or make pretty much most fields required. Okay, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but it has to be done in the right way and in a managed way, right? You can't make every field validated. That's not only going to, what that will do actually is quite the opposite. People will try to find ways of adding data in, or trying to beat the system, which then is going to cause corruption, and eventually you're going to become a cropper down the line. So think about where it's needed to put those things into your user design, but also if you've got lots and lots of fields, think about the ones you really need, and those that are critical for things like integrations, try to think about what is it you want the user to do, and how you want to lock that down all of it, and also make it easy for your users to update those records. And then finally, the security best practices. So I kind of touched on this already with cross-scripting attacks, SOC injection attacks. One thing I'd always look into is looking at how people log into Salesforce. So putting IP restrictions in place. Should they be logging in the local service station off the side of a road? Probably not. Also think about single sign-on. So how do we get people to log in through the federation of an organization? One of the ones that I really like, and I know it's becoming a bit of a controversial topic in the industry, specifically with Salesforce, is enforcing MFA, or multi-factor authentication. So this is actually becoming enforceable in February of next year by Salesforce, and they're giving companies 6 months to basically put this into place as they are making it a requirement. And I say it's a little bit controversial because a number of businesses aren't geared for this yet, or they're frightened about it and it wasn't going to break, in terms of integrations. And I would say, at least from my experience and from the information I've read, Salesforce have actually thought this through. They really have. And there's a lot of good documentation and about how it will work. And they even actually go into quite a lot of depth about the different scenarios. But my advice there is don't put it off to the last minute. Start thinking about how you could actually help secure your Salesforce org, especially with login. And also, it will flush out the user account that's used by many people issue, because you can only have an MFA to one user. So it's just something to think about and maybe consider for next year. So let's come back to more about the backup and recovery. So what are the critical questions we should be asking ourselves? First of all, what is our recovery point objective? So what am I talking about here is how much data am I willing to lose? So coming back to my weekly export situation at the beginning of this conversation, am I willing to lose 3 days worth of data? Is it 7 days worth? Right? Think about, what is your restore point? And a lot of people will say probably within a 24-hour period. And that is a good thing because we should be able to get you back to where you need to be when the loss happens, and do so without losing as much data. Reliability. So how much can we count on our backup and recovery solutions? Let me ask you this. If you had, say, a backup solution which is on the same platform as the SaaS application we're talking about, is that a good thing? It might be, if you think about it, yes, okay, it's using the same platform, but what if that data center goes down? What if that location goes down? Do you have accessibility to your data? Can you still continue as a business with that data behind, in a data center that's currently in trouble? These are some of the questions we ask our customers, and especially they ask us at OwnBackup to consider what would happen if, say, one of our data centers was impacted. And we actually have mitigation around that, where we would move data from a side switch or move to a different data center in a matter of an hour or so. Equally, when we've had Salesforce incidents more regularly, there's been a few more this year, people have been impressed that actually going into OwnBackup, they were able to get access to their data, able to continue as a business. And in one or two cases, we have customers that actually have replicated orgs or Salesforce orgs, and we're able to push the data straight into it and actually kept going as a business until the incident was finished. And in those scenarios, can I just add, they're very rare. We're talking about total data loss, total data inaccessibility, but it does happen. And actually, it's something to think about when we're looking at backup and recovery solutions. Which kind of leads me to the next point, which is what about recovery time objectives, so the RTO? How long could I afford without my data? Can I afford to be down for 24 hours? I might not. We have a lot of customers that actually can't afford to be down for more than, a couple of hours, right? And you shouldn't always settle for, days on end. You should be talking more around, 4 to 6 hour RTOs. And this is important to put this into your plan when we're talking about backup and recovery. Security. We talked about security earlier on Salesforce, but security also is on backup and recovery systems. So does it have all the security features that are in line with information security principles? Is your data encrypted at rest? That's an interesting one. A lot of people will forget that one. We have at OwnBackup our own encryption, but we also have the ability to allow you to bring your own keys for encryption, and actually also even bring your own KMS, or basically put your own key management system in place with AWS. And actually you can secure your data even more if you wish, and you can encrypt it how you like. So it means that you have maximum ownership of your data. You'll take your responsibility for the security of that. And most importantly, data integrity. Now, we talked about this in Salesforce, but again, this is important for backups, because how do you know that you've got everything you need from your backups? Are you actually able to access all your fields? Are you accessing your objects? Are you able to pull all of the data? And one of the things that we do here at OwnBackup, especially in the technical account management team, is we do a lot of integrity checking with our more complex customers and teach them to fish. And this means that not only are they keeping their backups in really good shape, but when it happens, not if, they've got their data, they're ready to rock and roll. They can put in a recovery plan and they can get back to doing business quickly. The thing here is that what we tend to lack is this kind of notion of a data recovery readiness. And there is kind of there's a methodology that I've kind of written here, partly from experience, but also just thinking about it logically. And I've split it into 3 areas. So we've got to think about, when it comes to doing data recovery readiness, about our technology stack. What are the things that I'm going to need? The security features, the auditing, retention policies of backups, how much backups do I need to keep? Have I got the appropriate, uptime and availability that I need? What about the platform? Is it resilient? Has there been a history of how many incidents that platform has had? Is it going to give me what I need? Then we put that into the planning and process. So actually, we create a data recovery plan. So this is very similar to a disaster recovery plan. It may well be the same for you as an organization, but we always advise you do start to put in a recovery plan. So should it happen, you've got a plan, you know what you're doing, you know what the remediation is, you know whose roles are what, okay? Rather than, kind of goodwill and asking a technical team to try and do, some sort of incident management, which is what we do see a lot of. It's kind of trying to do best endeavor. And then what happens is something gets lost, like communication between teams, or it might be that nobody's managing it properly. So having a data recovery plan is important. And again, defining the RTO and RPO, completely, absolutely 100% important. And I will say this, it will help your CFO, your chief financial officer, to no end if you can define it. Because if you can define something in numbers, they love it. And RTOs and RPOs, if you can say that, our RTO will be, 4 hours, and our RPO is, say, less than 24 hours, they're going to be happy with that. And also that goes into the next thing. How often do you actually test the data recovery plan? It's not just a pretty piece of paper. It doesn't sit in a red folder on a shelf covering dust. It's got to be tested. Making sure that your team is well drilled is going to be crucial to your success when it does happen. And actually having the skills and having the knowledge is just going to help you to no end. And we work with our customers at OwnBackup to make sure that we do these drills on a regular basis and hold them to account for that, because it's important that they are ready should loss happens, and we're very passionate about that. Also, one of the things I always find difficult, I guess, with some organizations is about logging when there's data loss and corruption, or even logging near misses. So why I say that's difficult is because often we'll have an incident and we forget about it. We go, yeah, we recovered, let's move on to the next thing. No, we should be logging these as well. And this is partly because we need to learn from it. It's partly because we need it for auditing and compliance. But also, it's important to then use that information to critique and to fine tune your data recovery plan based on what you've learned. And that's something I would, encourage everyone. And when I say near misses, it's a bit of an edge case, but and in the sense of you may not be able to record every single one. So what am I talking about here is what are the things that happened on your orgs or your applications that could have been really nasty? You could have lost a lot of data. That is a very much an honesty exercise internally, right? It's about people being honest with themselves, saying, you know what, this could have gone really badly wrong. And it's very hard to admit that. But I encourage you to do it as a good practice, because it keeps, again, it helps you identify those gaps and you can close them. And then finally, in line with all of this, is doing what I call an AAR, or after action review, or lessons learned, if you like. It's important, again, to be honest with ourselves. Did we respond the right way? We might have been successful, but what took the most time for us? What was it that was really challenging? What things do we need to build up in the team so that we're ready for loss again? And that's something I always encourage for after any incident when it involves data recovery. And then finally, got our people. So, you know, I kind of alluded this. What are the roles that people are going to play? Is it the Salesforce admin that should be the incident manager? Is it actually the CIO who has to be the incident manager? Who's doing the communications? Who's getting the tea and the coffee? All that kind of stuff is important, because we need to make sure people are playing in their same lanes and they're running, you know, to what is in the plan. Regularly drilling those recovery plans, really super important. What about the COE and the technical users? When was the last time they did a backup and recovery and actually used those skills? Was it 6 months ago? Was it 12 months ago? Was it never? You know, we need to make sure that as our teams grow and they change, that everyone knows how to use the tools, knows how to recover, knows how to do all of these things without hesitation. And that's where we want to be with this, because then it goes in line with your compliance in terms of your RTO and RPOs. And also, one of the ones that I find really interesting is a number of organizations who forget about security awareness training. We do this a lot in OwnBackup. We actually are, as technical account managers, very, very drilled in this area. And we do a lot of recertification, if you will, just to make sure that we're aware of the latest security principles. How do we keep our data safe? And I recommend that you might think about that as a team. You know, when was the last time you did it? And actually, if it's been a long time, you probably should do it. So I recommend you to have a think about that as well. All of these things then relate into what I call a maturity model. So basically, if you start with a level 1, where it's as a kind of a best effort, you know, there isn't a plan, but people will react and do stuff. But actually, it's very underwhelming when you get a loss or corruption. But then level 2 is probably where, you know, you might have a plan in place, but you lack the proper capability. So you're kind of reactive still, but you have something to work with. You're not completely at a standstill. And then there's level 3, which is where I kind of say your business is prepared. So you've got your data recovery plan, you know your RTOs and RPOs, they align with the business demands. So actually the businesses are actually saying, when was the last time, you know, we've done a data recovery plan? What are our RTOs and RPOs? Are we happy with that as a business? Because we need to make sure we can continue. And also making sure our technical users have received some form of training, which is more than a year ago at that point. Level 4 and 5 are kind of the same. The only difference is with level 4, it's more about being managed and proactive. So you have like an outsourced agency or an outsourced team that actually takes care of all of this for you and will be deployed should you need to do any recovery as a program. And they may have large swaths of technical users that can help with this and help you get back on the road quite quickly. But their training might be more than a year ago. But even so, you know, it's something I would always question at that level. But level 5 is kind of utopia, where everyone is fully trained. It was less than a year ago. We're doing drills on a regular basis. We are actually, you know, being proactive with our disaster recovery plans, and it's a seamless exercise. So we're not sort of stopping and starting and having, you know, internal challenges. It should be, we know what we're doing. We're going to go into that mode, and then we move on, you know, quite quickly. And key question here is, a lot of people ask me, where do I think most businesses will sit? Honestly, it would be probably at level 3. Nowadays, if you asked me 10 years ago, definitely level 1. But level 3 is probably where I see a lot of businesses sit these days. And in terms of this kind of maturity, it's an ongoing thing, right? So you can go up, we can go down in the level. So it's never static, but at least this is a good model that I use to sort of assess, where a business is and where I think they need to work towards. So how do we respond to data loss? So you normally get something like this. You'll get like an email from a user that's saying, hey, I've just lost some accounts. It's probably very vague. So you'll say, I've lost 10 accounts. I can't see, everything I had from yesterday. My contacts have also got some weird email addresses have been added. Help me. Thanks, Bob. It's a good indicator for me to go and look at things. But obviously what we try to do is that your recovery solution, whatever it is, should also have some proactive monitoring. At OwnBackup, we use smart alerts. So actually before users tell you about it, you've had a loss, and you've got some deletion or some additions or corruptions. And this is something, I would also think about for your solution. Do you have that kind of monitoring and are able to sort of get onto it before the user does say something? Because if the user can see it, it means that it's starting to become visible in the business. But ideally, we should try to be proactive and enact the data recovery plan as soon as possible. And then it comes into the response model, which I call the ARV, which my boss would joke and say it's an armored response vehicle. That's not what it means. It's basically assess, recover, and validate. So assess the damage. Execute the data or disaster recovery plan first and foremost. When was the loss discovered? When was the last full backup that you completed? And also, do we have a backup that was done before that loss? And what's the real scale of the loss? Is it that 10 accounts, or is it 10 accounts, 20 contacts, 50 opportunities, so on and so forth? And most importantly, and I say this in bold, is the loss still happening? If it is, you might want to stop it. But when we get to recover, we then need to make sure we do that assessment and compare between the last complete backup you have and also the data loss, the backup that has the data loss as well. And the OwnBackup allows us to do that very, very quickly. You can see where the gaps are. But then with that, you can start to understand which objects are involved in that loss and creating the remediation plan. So actually understanding how these objects need to be restored and what needs to go first. And then I say it again on here, and it's not because I'm being silly. Is the loss still happening? Sometimes we forget to check the loss is happening on assess. Well, maybe we have, but someone else has done something else to the system. Check again. Do it the second time. You will not believe a couple of my colleagues in the technical account team have been into organizations and the loss is still occurring. There's still a big deletion going on. And no one was wiser. Nobody knew about it. And they were questioned several times. So always double check and triple check because otherwise your restore is going to really be painful. Switch off all unnecessary automations and validation rules and triggers is a really important one. Again, if we're trying to reinsert data and it's doing all sorts of other things, it not only takes time for the records to be recovered, but also think about the further corruption or maybe potential loss as a result of your automations. So think carefully about whether or not they need to be in place. And then finally, execute the recovery. Validation, really, really super important. I'll tell you a very quick story. I had a data loss incident not too long ago with a customer who lost 3.3 million opportunities. In that 3.3 million opportunities, they restored about 378,000. Why did they just restore 378,000? That was the question I asked back. And they said, oh, well, wasn't that the scale of the loss? And I said, well, theoretically, if you've lost that data of 3.3 million, where's the other 3 million? We need to bring that back. It needs to be 1 for 1, okay? So always check that you've got the loss of the records or corruptions match what you've restored. This is really important. Also checking success and error logs. Even if it was successful, I would check these logs just to verify that the data looks roughly what I would expect when I go into Salesforce. I can look at the IDs, I can take a look at the records. Does it look right to me? If it does, excellent. If it doesn't, oh dear, what happened? So it's to capture out things like false positive successes and whatnot. So think about checking those logs as you do the recovery as well. Executing a backup to include the restored data is also super important. Nothing worse that you've just done a restore and then there's another data loss. So back it up after you've done any restoration, and it will also help you should another loss occur immediately. So always remember to do that. And most importantly, as I said before, organize that AAR as soon as possible. Get that lessons learned in place. Really look at your data plan, sorry, your data recovery plan. And if it needs changing, change it. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but basically, this is my, if you will, 12 steps for remediation. And it follows more or less what's on the ARV model that I talked about. But this just goes into a bit more lower level. And making sure that you go through kind of those steps. If anything else, you don't take anything else away today, take this, please. This is one I would implore you to have in your data recovery plan, to say that at least gives you some pointers to think about as you're doing the restoration. What are the steps you're taking and why we're doing this? And then with that, the methods to validate. So I mentioned that tools such as our own OwnBackup will allow you to do comparisons and have a lot of ways of auditing success, making sure the data is back the way it was. But even if you don't, do just double check for whatever systems you use, right? You may have your own way of doing it. Some people are old school and takes it out in CSVs and do a manual check. If that works for you, great. But the important thing is, let's make sure that we've got all the data back in place. Also, pay attention to things like relationships. Commonly, you might find some objects have restored successfully, but if you haven't done things in the right order, or perhaps you haven't got all the objects you need to restore, or miss one out, that's going to cause your partial restoration. And that's not difficult. It's not impossible to come back from, but it just means you're adding more time to your recovery. So pay attention to the relationships. If you're not sure what objects are connected to what, two things. Look at your architecture documentation and maps if you have one. If you don't have it, top tip of the day, go to Schema Builder in Salesforce. It will show you everything, okay? And follow it through if you're not certain. And then also during the preview and restore steps, in OwnBackup, we do allow you the ability to take out CSVs, and you can make choices about what records you actually want to recover. Some losses and corruptions are genuine. You're thinking, what? Well, data is always changing, right? So if something has been deleted intentionally, we don't want to be restoring it. Or perhaps if we've changed the field, we don't want to be restoring that. So think about, kind of those records that actually may not have been impacted, but it might come up as there's a change or they've been lost. So do survey the data that you are about to restore as well. Give yourself a sanity check. Always check also the target rec org has the record already existing. Sometimes we find a loss that happens that actually the record already is there, it's just been orphaned, or perhaps it's even in the recycling bin. If it's in the recycling bin and you can restore it, great. But I would always recommend that you do it from a full restoration point of view. The reason for that is because recycle bins have limits, and if you go over that limit, you will lose data and you won't know that you did. That's what happens in recycle bin, because when it gets too full, it will just get rid of lots of data. So always do the full restore. But again, if it's something really small, or if you think the data is in there somewhere, go and do a bit of fact finding, do a bit of surveying, just check to see whether those records are actually there. And maybe they've just been misplaced. That can happen. I'm going to miss the next point because I've just labored this like 3 times. But the final point is, I really like this one, which is about making sure that you get a colleague to peer review the recovery. Don't mark your own homework, basically. Get someone to do it with you. Check that it's successful and that everything went well. And then that way, not only is it just you checking, but someone else has already verified it. So thus, you're less likely to find you've missed a few records or you've made a mistake somewhere along the line. So please take that one on board as well. That's a really good one. So here's what we're going to say here. It's a bit of OwnBackup sales stuff now. So basically, we encourage you to take out towards a trial with OwnBackup. You can go to our website and you can see actually all of our solutions. I would encourage you to sort of take the time to have a look at our application, connect it to a sandbox, or you can connect it to production if you wish, but I recommend a sandbox because you can then have a good play, maybe do some data loss for yourself, or maybe try our other products such as Archiver and Sandbox Seeding. It's a free trial, and if you obviously are interested to talk about that more, our team is always available to have that chat with you, and we can take that further into sort of your specific needs. I'll open the floor now to you guys if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Kris, for taking the time to chat today. I actually did have a question.
Sure.
So you highlighted like 6 different ways to protect your data, like permission sets and things like that. What would you say, in your opinion, is the most important out of the 6, or if it's not, like, alternatively, should be the first step or the first thing to consider?
Good question. In fact, you kind of touched on the number one thing, which is about permissions, right? So if you often more than not, that's where things go wrong, where people kind of put too many permissions in place or give too much freedom to our users. I'm not saying our users are, unintelligent in any way. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's important that you should only grant access to data to people who need it, right, and be able to do their job. And actually making that adjusted well is going to help you in the long run, because basically it will prevent things like corruption or people accessing things they shouldn't. And that's kind of the biggest one that I find is a bit of a challenge with businesses, because especially SMBs, or think of your small businesses as well, they won't have that much rigor in terms of big organization data user base where actually they need to think about it, but they probably should, because it's about auditing at the end of the day and keeping you secure and knowing who's done what and who can do what to your data.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. So we did have a question in the chat from Jeff, who says, for US government and contractor customers, do you offer a backup stored on a US FedRAMP approved cloud?
Good question. I'm not too familiar with US FedRAMP, if I'm going to be honest. But we do have US government customers. We do actually have dedicated government service instances, which is based in the US. So, I mean, I'm happy to take that conversation further, Jeff, if you wanted to chat about that further. But I'm pretty certain the answer will be yes, but I would want to verify that with our info security team to give you a full informed answer.
What is the difference between trying to recover your data, or what are the steps to recover your data if you're using the weekly export from Salesforce as your data backup method versus having a data backup solution in place?
Great question. Lots of coffee, maybe some whiskey. No, jokes aside, we always say that backing up is easy, it's the recovery that's hard. And a lot of the time it's because the hard bit is actually taking all the files that you have for your exports that come out in CSVs per object. And basically, if you are uncertain about your relationships, or if you get it wrong in terms of which records you restore first, you can cause a massive problem when it comes to the recovery. You actually might have to start again in a lot of cases. Also, there's a bit of degree of not as much confidence when restoring in that way, because you're almost trying to test edit a little bit. So a lot of customers will go to the sandbox first to do a recovery there, try things out. And I probably would say the biggest challenge as well is knitting those relationships back together. So Salesforce, as you know, has unique IDs, which are 15 digit and 18. And these are basically saying these records, that's your ID, we know who you are. But the problem is when you actually insert records back into Salesforce, without a bit of jiggery pokery using external fields, for example, to put in an ID and doing a matching, it's very, very difficult. So my advice, this is kind of the reason why weekly exports really aren't enough, because that's going to increase your RTO by not hours, days. And I've done it the hard way as a customer. And I'll say this, it took me the best part of 2 weeks to do a restoration. And that was based on, an organization which had about 2 million records. So nothing really, I say nothing really massive compared to enterprise, where there'll be hundreds of millions. But even that's quite challenging because I have to go through all the relationships manually. So using OwnBackup, we actually do all of that for you. So we take the guesswork out 100%. And also we can validate it before it goes into Salesforce. So we do this because we almost rebuild the relationships before we send this into Salesforce. So everything should go in seamlessly. And occasionally it doesn't, because it might be the org hasn't got the right config, or it might be something has changed, or something benign like that. But that's still saves me a lot of time compared to me sitting there with my coffee for days on end, trying to work out how to put my data back in.
Hi. Yeah, one of the challenges in a restoration is you kind of want to have the old system and the new system up side by side to look at. And I was wondering, is that what you mean by sandbox? Is it is it looking at the restored version of the application with the restored data so that you can look at them to compare?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the manual context, yes. So if I was doing a weekly export, but with OwnBackup, you don't necessarily need to do that, because we actually do the comparison against the backup snapshots. So we wouldn't need like another org to compare against. That's the key difference maker, is the fact that we've already got all that information in one place. We can almost do that side by side in the actual OwnBackup application, and it will find the differences and then advise, what is it that you need to restore in terms of what's actually broken, and actually will it do it successfully. But yes, you're right. The old school way would have been to use a full sandbox, do a comparison against production, which is manual, and it could be as simple as just doing row counts. But for that, I find that kind of misleading, because you won't know necessarily what's happening in corruption, but you'll definitely know the loss. Where we go that level down in OwnBackup, we do things like adds, deletes, changes, and that's really kind of great from a assessment point of view, because I can make the decisions quickly, and then actually I can put the remediation plan in place more quickly as well. Does that answer your question, Jeff?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kris, for taking the time to chat with us. I really appreciate it, and for putting the presentation together. I think everyone can agree that, it's been really insightful. And also thank you to everyone else for coming along today. This is our last Salesforce Republic meetup of 2021. So we'll see you all in the new year.